I'm so excited to be able to start our discussion together this morning on Seasons of a Mother's Heart. When I look back on the years of my being a mom, I feel like every year, more and more, I truly believe in the significance of motherhood. But the reason I wrote this, and I was in the middle of my life when I wrote this 10 years ago. I had just had Joy, who is now 13. She'll be 13 this month. And all my other children were 13 and down. And I was in the midst of trying to continually remind myself what my vision was, why I believed in this. And at that point, I think that I was beginning to realize that this was a long distance run. And that there would be times I'd be up and that it was perfectly normal to feel overwhelmed, like you didn't even want to get out of bed. Or that maybe the next day that you loved your children and were so glad you were doing it. And then you'd wonder, am I neurotic? I think that if somebody had prepared us for war, if we were going into a great battle, they would train us and tell us what to expect and what enemies there were. But in motherhood, oftentimes, if you're like me, I came into this whole call of motherhood without having any understanding at all what I was supposed to do. I remember I was at a baby shower, and all of these women were telling me all of these great things about what it would be to be a mom, and oh, you'll do fine in birth. And then I was going down the hallway at one point, and this woman got a hold of me, and she said, "Look at me." She said, "It's gonna hurt more than anything you've ever done in your whole life." And she said, "And it's not gonna be easy." And I feel like, in a way, I should have listened to her, because it wasn't just the birthing that was harder than I thought, but it was having these children around the clock, and I wasn't prepared to know what to do with them. I was so excited to finally be a mom. I got married when I was older, had my first child when I was almost 32. But I wasn't prepared for how long this season would be, and yet I'm here to say I believe it's the most important thing we can do. But the first chapter that we're going to be talking about today is called Celebrating Life. Because I think when we enter into this topic of motherhood, we have to really understand that what attitude you come into your home with, your life with, your relationship with your children with, will determine to a great deal the success of your impact on your children for God and for His kingdom. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that really have to do with me learning to celebrate life. The first story is, and I'm sure you've felt this many times before, since my husband and I were in ministry, in church ministry for many years, Monday was always an overwhelming day for me, because Sunday we would be involved in activities and with people, and so when I would get up out of the bed on Monday morning, as I would walk through the living room, the stress would already start mounting, because I would see, just socks and shoes thrown off where they had last been, and Legos and dirty cups of coffee or tea or cereal bowls, funny papers, and when I started Monday morning, I had an agenda. And so I can remember this particular morning. I was walking through the house, and the stress was mounting as I went, and I was beginning to put on my Sergeant Mommy voice and attitude. I had an agenda, and so I called all of my children in. I think Sarah was probably 12 or 13 years old, and then we had a 9 and a 6.5 or 7, and then a baby Joy who was almost 6. And so I said, okay, I want everybody to come into the room. I'm going to go put the laundry in the washing machine, and when I come back, I expect to see things done. And so I gave one child, you gather all the dishes and put them in the sink and rinse them out and put them in the dishwasher, and you straighten out the living room, and you go and get all of the dirty clothes in the house. And so I expected, I had these high expectations, and I was training my children, and they were going to obey me. And so I went over to, at that point, I was living with my mother-in-law when we started our ministry, and our office was next door, and that's where the washer and dryer was. So I went next door, put all the wash and laundry in, and when I came back, not only was nothing done, the messes were still where they were, the cups were still where they were, the Legos were still where they were, but I could hear back in the back bedroom where Clay and I had our bedroom, I could hear, oh, they were just giggling and laughing. Well, as I was marching through the living room, I was coming more and more with this attitude that I was going to have, and I knew what I was going to say to these children who'd been negligent. And so when I got into the bedroom, there were my 3 oldest children. On my king-size bed, I had put 2 pillows around Joy. She was about 5 months old. And they said, and my children don't normally call me Ma, they said, "Hey, Ma, come here! And look, Joy discovered her foot and she's eating it. Ah!" And I knew at that moment that I had a choice to make. That this was a moment of celebrating the birth and wonder of my precious little baby Joy. Or it was a moment when I could explode all over my children and ruin the day. And I realized again that when God created children, he created us to enjoy them. He created them to be those who would laugh, who would make messes, who would have fun. Boys will be loud, girls will be fussy and prissy. That if I didn't change my attitude, I was in great danger of ruining the whole day. And so as I go into this whole issue about celebrating life, I've realized that as I go through the seasons of my life, rather than resisting the tension that each season brings, that if I'm going to be the joyful mother of joyful children, I have to lean in to the seasons. I have to make a decision of my will to enjoy my children, to enjoy the limitations. But I love the verse in Romans 12:1 and 2, which I'd like to read for a moment. When Paul was talking to some young believers in Rome and giving them advice, he gave them this verse, and it's really a picture of what I've learned is a real important thing for me in my walk as a mom. It says, "Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual of worship." So we're basically supposed to put ourselves on God's altar and say, here is my life. It is for you. I'm going to worship you by putting my expectations into your hands, my rights into your hands. But he goes on to say, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." When we come into this whole season of motherhood, we can't come into it with the baggage that the culture in this day and time brings to us. We need to understand that we're not living in a culture that's child-friendly. We're not living in a culture that says, have lots of babies, enjoy your home. And it takes a shifting of our attitude. I had been a single woman, professional, and worked with adults my whole life. I had to decide that I would enjoy the baby putting her foot in her mouth, the giggling of my children, to enjoy every part that that season would bring. But the second thing I had to do is I had to resist all of the peer pressure that was around me. People had said to me, you know what, don't give all your time to your children. You have so much background in teaching and you've been in missions. You need to get your PhD and you need to teach in seminary. It would be a waste of all of your experience. And so the first thing when we come into this area of celebrating life, we need to learn to choose to be thankful and accept the limitations of each season. I love the verse that says, "This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." It's a choice of my will. I will rejoice and be glad in this day. There's a passage that I like in 1 Thessalonians. It's 16 through 18. And it says,